All right, here we go. Welcome to the first episode of Green Bay Greg, which is a satellite show off of in the RTF network, off of our Twitch show. And one of the benefits that I have on my show is I go last. We have two other shows with my co-hosts, Mike on the mic and Benzi's Bit. Matthew went earlier today, did a great job. And then Mike just went a little while ago, and I'm going last. And like I said, one of the benefits of going last is that I get to kind of correct them on all of their mistakes. And trust me, I spend way too much time preparing 20 some odd minutes of show because I could spend 23 minutes correcting all of their BS. So a little bit about me, like Matt said, like Mike said, this gives all of our RTF and all of our Twist viewers great opportunity to get to know each and every one of us individually. And here we go. I'm already looking at it. It's already got up. Might as well just throw it up there. See, Mike's already ready to chime in, which I'm a minute 35 into the show. Kind of thought it would take about a minute 34 less for Mike to start chiming in. So a little bit about me. I am 44 years old. I have an 11-year-old daughter, a 9-year-old son. I am divorced, and if this Corona thing lasts any longer, I will be living in a van down by the river. I did grow up in Wisconsin. I grew up just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in Waukesha, Wisconsin. I'm a diehard Packer fan, diehard Bucks fan. I did grow up, though, really idolizing the Twins, the Minnesota Twins. I am a Brewers fan as well. However, Kirby Puckett was my hero, and growing up, my dad just kind of went with it. I thought when I was about 5 years old, they named a team after me because I do have a twin brother. So that was one of the things that, just kind of made me a little more unique than a lot of my family and friends, as I did like the Twins. 17 years ago, I moved up to Minnesota, held on to my fan allegiance. In fact, I was either loved or hated, depending on who you were. Being a Wisconsin sports fan, living in the land of 10,000 excuses for not winning a Super Bowl, and just kind of went with it. It became, more of my personality, more of my ideal. And then about 2.5 years ago, I met Mike, and one of the things that you'll learn about me is everything I do is intentional. The sweatshirt I'm wearing right now is the sweatshirt I wore the day I met Mike. Mike at the mics, the co-host, the guy whose picture is right behind my head. First thing he said to me when he saw me wearing this sweatshirt was, "Oh, great, an effing Green Bay fan." Yes, I did keep the expletives out for the sake of Twist. They asked us to keep down the expletives. But it kind of built into, Mike is actually the one who gave me the nickname Green Bay Greg. My last name is Bauman, which makes sense, so GBG. But it kind of became like, more of my calling card. Being a Green Bay fan, Packer fan, Wisconsin sports fan, also Badgers, something that I just kind of went with and became even more passionate about. On a side note, the only real pet peeve I have when it comes to sports and sports talk is ignorant views. I don't care who you think is the greatest this or the best that, or the greatest team, the greatest player, whatever, and we'll get into that. My only view is I hate ignorance. Don't tell me your view on something and your reason for it is because I said so, or because it's just what I think. Give me some reasons behind it. Give me some logic. If you think that LeBron is the best, great. If you think MJ is the best, great. If you think Kobe's the best, great. But don't tell me the reason is because I'm an idiot. Give me some logic. Give me some reasons. We'll get into it. As a background, I did go to school. I am a graduate of the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee with a degree in history. My emphasis are 20th century American history and the history of religion. Another thing I'll get into. One other thing that's going to make this show this little segment a little more unique than most. I'm not just going to talk about sports. I'm going to tell you how I feel about pretty much anything under the sun. So buckle up, Buttercup. Here we go. First thing I want to talk about is probably the one thing that anyone really thinks that I give a damn about, and that's Jordan Love getting drafted to the Green Bay Packers. Here's the thing. The Packers are the only team, if you make the assumption, and I think it's a pretty safe assumption, if you make the assumption that Aaron Rodgers one day will be in the Hall of Fame, the Green Bay Packers are the only franchise to win Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks who will all be in the Hall of Fame. They did it with Bart Starr, they did it with Brett Favre, and they did it with Aaron Rodgers. Now, most people think that the whole idea of drafting Aaron Rodgers in the first round when Brett Favre was still healthy, able-bodied, and playing was unique for any team at the time. And yeah, it wasn't unheard of, but it was pretty unique. Now, keep in mind, something that most people might not realize, when the Packers picked up Brett Favre in the early 90s, 1992, they traded a first-round draft pick for him. He was drafted at the beginning of the second round in the year prior by the Atlanta Falcons. Packers give up their first-round draft pick to get him. Great. Here's the thing that most people don't understand. The quarterback they had at the time was a quarterback by the name of Don Majkowski, who was a Pro Bowler. He was the fans in Wisconsin, Green Bay fans all over used to refer to him as the Magic Man because his name was spelled Majkowski. By the way, that was from memory. That's having a Polish mom. That's how you remember how to spell those names. They referred to him as the Magic Man. He was a Pro Bowler. He did take the Packers to the playoffs. The Packers at that time felt they needed a backup, and they were willing to take a chance on this quarterback out of Mississippi known as Brett Favre. So it turned out to be a 20-year great gamble. So they did it again. Now, granted, there was different management along the way, different personnel that did that. Now they're doing it again. Did they do it too soon? Possibly. But the Packers would be the only team in the history of football to be able to make what is close to a 35, possibly 40-year transition from one quarterback to another, that is of Pro Bowl caliber. A lot of other teams have a lag in there. Andrew Luck did, take the baton from Peyton Manning after a crappy year, and they needed to have the first overall pick to get it. Joe Montana to Steve Young. Steve Young was drafted by played Canadian football, played for the Buccaneers. It is hard to do. The only team that could come up with in recent memory that had a Super Bowl caliber quarterback that went to another Super Bowl caliber quarterback who were both drafted was Drew Bledsoe, who played in a Super Bowl against the Packers that went right to Tom Brady. It's a hard thing to do. You got to give teams credit who are able to roll the dice and take those chances. Now, it doesn't happen often. I'm not saying it's going to happen with Jordan Love, but it's worth a risk. Now, moving on to the next, smooth transition. How are the Packers going to do this year? Big thing that we talk about on Twist is, right now, not a lot of sports going on. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about, what teams did in the draft to help their team out for the 2020 season. Let's make the assumption that the team's going to go and, the season's going to go on as it should. I'm going to make that assumption just because there's too much money involved. What did the Packers do in the draft to help out their 2020 campaign? I'll be the first to admit, not a lot on paper. They did some work in free agency. They picked up on the middle linebacker. They picked up what, I'll be honest, maybe third level wide receiver. They already have Devontae Adams. They picked up Funchess, not the greatest. They didn't do anything in the draft. However, when was the last time a team won the Super Bowl where you look back and said, wow, that previous year's draft is what really put them over the top? No, what happens with that is players developing from the year or two prior that they did draft in, prior to 2-3 years earlier, plus free agency pickups. The Packers are in a win now mode. Now, granted, I'll argue with anybody that a lot of these picks were questionable. Taking A.J. Dillon in the second round, once again, questionable. They're going to be a run-first team. I am willing to sit back and take a look and wait and see what happens. However, they were 13-3. There was only one team in the NFL that was head and shoulders above them. That was obviously the 49ers. Good for them. It was a great season that they had, and in 13-3. Now, did they do enough in free agency, in the draft, in studying film to be able to beat the 49ers? We'll find out. Right now, I'm willing to give them a chance. Now, making a transition, I know that Mike got to go do his show here a few minutes ago. Matt did his earlier, and like I said, I like to correct everyone. Matt Talked about how my show is going to be a little more, well, let's just call it a little more Zen-like, a little more deep thought. Matt actually mentioned that I might wear my cowboy hat for the show. Matt, when you watch this, ask yourself this question. If it's a nice sunny day outside and you own a Lamborghini, you're going to keep it in the garage. Come on, buddy. Look at this. You're going to show that off. And so now, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time correcting Mike on different things that he found. He did do a great show, talked about two sport athletes. However, Mike is a little bit young, just young guy. Mentioned a lot of things. Wilt Chamberlain, All-American volleyball player. Mike, come on, you're better than that. Tim Duncan actually was an Olympic caliber swimmer. Did not learn how to play basketball growing up in the Virgin Islands until a hurricane came through and destroyed the aquatic center. Had to learn how to do something else with his time. By the way, folks, none of that stuff is on this paper. That's all right from the old noodle. Mike refers to me as a human Post-it note because if I hear something, I will never forget it. And every girl I've ever dated hates me for that. So I want to make another transition into something that happened that's a little more life appropriate, a little off of the traditional sports beat, moving on to something that happened this weekend. On Saturday, me and my kids were at a park, more of a baseball diamond open area. We were social distancing from the world, and they were flying kites. It was a great day, and it gave me a second to really look at the way that they were doing it and looking at the way that I view not only sports, but life. And I did it through their eyes. My 11-year-old daughter, her goal was, flying her kite, and her goal was to get the kite all the way out, get all the string out, get it as high as possible. And, I was taking pictures the higher it got, and it was a lot of fun for her. My son, on the other hand, who's 9, his kite, which, by the way, thank you, Uncle Matt. Uncle Matt picked up a couple of kites for the kids, thought they'd be fun for us to do. A little gift from Uncle Matt. Connor's kite had a Tyrannosaurus Rex on it. And Connor let it out, got the kite going, and he started walking around the baseball diamond with the kite. It was always about 15, 20 feet away from him. And he just kept walking around. I'm like, Connor, what are you doing, buddy? He's like, I'm just walking my Tyrannosaurus Rex, walking my T-Rex. And he just kept going around in circles. But his goal was to keep the kite in the air as long as possible. Whereas my daughter's goal was to get it up as high as possible. Now, I looked at that from two different aspects when it pertains to how I view sports. You look at consistency versus pushing the limits. There was no way with my daughter doing the kite thing the way that she was going to do it, was she going to be able to keep her kite in the air as long as Connor did. Connor had control of his. It was within reason. Connor was looking for consistency. Olivia was looking for, pushing it to the limit. And I thought that was pretty, obviously Matt said during his show, I'm overthinking. I overthink everything. I overthought how to tie my shoes before I left the house to come here. I overthought how to trim my beard. So I overthink everything. But in this case, I thought it was a really neat way to look at the way that we view different things. We look at, Matt and Mike both talked about it, and we've all been obsessed with the MJ versus LeBron debate. Who is the GOAT, the greatest of all time? What I find is more unique than anything else is, why is this sport, basketball, why is it the one sport where we can make those passionate arguments about who is the GOAT, who is the greatest of all time? We don't do it with any other sport. Why? Individual sports have clear-cut, understood GOATs. Who's the greatest swimmer of all time? Michael Phelps. Why? He's got more gold medals than anyone else. Who's the greatest golfer of all time? Right now, it's Jack Nicklaus. Will Tiger Woods ever pass him? Tiger Woods is going to have to win more majors because right now there are clear-cut, definite, terms as to what defines the greatest of all time. In hockey, it's understood that the greatest of all time is, the great one, Wayne Gretzky. And it's pretty simple to understand because his accomplishments are so great. In fact, there's a stat somewhere where if you take away all of his goals, he'd still be the highest point scorer. We'll have to get Matt to talk about that. I don't know enough about hockey to understand how to get a point versus a goal. Whatever. I just know that he is understood by anyone who appreciates hockey as the greatest of all time. In football, it's impossible to determine who is the greatest of all time because Well, there's 11 different positions on each side of the ball. There's 22 different positions. Jerry Rice is the greatest receiver of all time. That's understood. Can Jerry Rice throw a football as well as Joe Montana, Brett Favre, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, any of those guys? Absolutely not. Can any of those guys catch a ball like he could, run a route like he could? No, of course not. Now, can any of those guys tackle someone like Lawrence Taylor, Reggie White, or anyone else that plays on the defensive side of the ball? Of course not. So the greatest of all time in football is usually understood as the greatest of their position. Now, who's the greatest quarterback of all time? I love those arguments because those arguments even have, different wings to it. The most accomplished quarterback of all time is easily Tom Brady. The greatest winner of all time, Tom Brady. Now, who's the best, quarterback of all time? The guy that you would want to mold around. Well, is it Peyton Manning? Is it John Elway? Is it Joe Montana? Who's the best thrower of all time? Some people will say Brett Favre. As a Packer fan, I'll tell you right now, Brett Favre was great. He was fun to watch. Guy made more mistakes than anyone else. Right now, we make fun of a guy like Jameis Winston, who is part of the quote-unquote 30 for 30 club. With Brett Favre, guy threw 40 touchdowns in a year. Packer fans, we didn't care if he threw 25 interceptions. We assumed that he was going to throw 25 interceptions, but he was going to get us into the playoffs and possibly into the Super Bowl. So what are you willing to put up with? In baseball, who's the greatest of all time? A lot of people right now who have absolutely no knowledge of sports will tell you that it's Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was 6'2" and weighed 215 pounds. On our show, Twist Sports Talk, and he's also Cardboard Doge, one of our favorite twins of all time, is about 6'2", 215 pounds. Cardboard Doge, the real Brian Dozier, is a great player. Right now, he'd be a utility player. Babe Ruth would be a second baseman, maybe a shortstop if he lost the gut. Babe Ruth could not play in Major League Baseball right now. He played in an era where they did not allow minorities to play, and the pitcher's mound was in a spot where you pretty much could have put the ball on a tee. Babe Ruth, I'll tell you right now, he's a mythical creature who is understood to be the greatest baseball player of all time by people who don't want to break down the sport. Who's the greatest pitcher of all time? I'll make the argument right now that it's someone like Sandy Koufax, someone like Nolan Ryan. Randy Johnson was great, but didn't have that arsenal of different pitches. Roger Clemens was my favorite pitcher of all time just because he was able to use the pitcher's mound in an intimidating fashion, unlike anyone else I've ever been able to see. Now, granted, there's the whole steroid debate. Who's the greatest hitter of all time? Barry Bonds was the most intimidating batter of all time. But you could make the argument that when it came to just making contact with the ball, you're never going to find another player better than Ichiro. However, who's the last one to hit 400? Ted Williams. Before my time, like I said, I'm 44 years old. But I'm willing to look back at who's able to do all these things. There's Rogers Hornsby. There's all these players. There's guys that no one wants to talk about because of the way the game was played, but they were great players. What I'll say is, the argument I like to make when it comes to baseball is who is the greatest of the generation that they were playing in. Now, what do you consider a generation? A 20-year span. Ken Griffey Jr., a few years older than me, great player to watch. Who am I willing to pay money to watch play? That's who I would consider the greatest of the time I care about. If I lived back in the time, I'd pay to see Babe Ruth. Right now, I wouldn't pay him to play minor league baseball because those minor league players would probably, laugh him out of the stadium. Moving on to the MJ versus LeBron debate. This is where I'm going to make fun of Matt. Matt said earlier today on his show that he thinks that it's LeBron because he never got a chance to see MJ play. Matt's 29 years old. Matt, that's like saying that America is the greatest country in the world and you don't own a passport. Get on a plane and check out other countries. They might just you might just get off the plane. They might just give shit away, but you have no idea. MJ, in my opinion, is the greatest competitor of all time. LeBron James, I don't think should be compared to MJ because LeBron James plays a different style of basketball. LeBron James plays basketball very similarly to another player that I really idolized growing up, Magic Johnson. And Magic Johnson, in one finals game, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was hurt. So in the same series, so in the same 7-game series, he started games in 4 different positions, from the 5 position, the center position, to point guard in one 7-game series. LeBron is the only player since Magic Johnson that could do something like that. LeBron is the type of player that you want on your team, because he would be perfect if Bill Belichick was a basketball coach, because you could plug him into any position. That's, I think, what makes LeBron so unique. What made Michael so unique was his competitive nature was never seen before this. Now, who's come along since then? You can make the argument that Kobe's been just as competitive. Kobe Bryant is also a clone of Michael Jordan. He would have been the first to admit it. He even spoke just like Michael did, and that was intentionally. Who's the first person to use the phrase in post-game interviews? The game of basketball. Michael Jordan used to use that phrase all the time. Go on YouTube. Turn on Kobe Bryant post-game clips. You'll hear the exact same phrase. Kobe Bryant was very intentional about quoting Michael Jordan. So moving on, got a few minutes left here. What I wanted to get into is one of the things that I'm passionate about when it comes to sports, when it comes to pretty much anything in life, and that includes politics. That is, I don't care who you voted for. Like I said earlier, I don't care what your stance is on anything, just have an opinion on it. I would never not be friends with someone because they voted for Obama or because they voted for Trump. But what I will not stand is someone who says to me, I don't like you because you voted for so-and-so. Here's a little secret, listeners, to Green Bay, Greg. In the first time that Obama ran for office, I voted for Obama. Why? Because his political views helped out my family at the time. This last election, I voted for Trump. Why? Because his stances at that time helped matched with where my life was at. I will vote for someone based on their political views, not for what party they belong to, not for what other people think about it. If you are walking through life because you want to believe things because someone else tells you, especially a celebrity, you know what? You should have your vote taken away from you. I would rather have someone make an educated vote based on where they are in their personal life and where their family's at in life and what they deem at that point in their life to be important. Vote for whoever you want, rather than someone who says that I want to vote for someone and pulls up who Oprah is going to vote for, or who Michael Jordan's going to vote for, or anyone else. You know why? Because billionaires have nothing in common with you. There's not one billionaire who's watching this show right now, but there's a lot of people who have very similar points, who are at similar points in their life to me. So vote for who you want, but have some logic behind it. And that's all I got for this episode. But you know what? Don't be a sheep. Don't be a follower. Follow what you want. Be who you want to be, but be passionate about it. You know what, folks? Thanks. And until next week, GBG out.